It's 5:04 and welcome into a Wednesday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour on News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good morning to you. Well, North Carolina is among 23 states that were awarded grants totaling upwards of $130 million. That money coming from the U.S. Department of Transportation to promote innovative transportation technologies. Now, obviously, there's been a lot going on in the Northeast with drones, but in this case, the North Carolina Department of Transportation's Division of Aviation is set to receive $1.1 million to develop what is called a, quote, drone-in-the-box program. That is utilizing autonomous drones to aid in disaster responses. These drones can be deployed remotely before storms to capture damage images and deliver emergency supplies. These are large devices that we're talking about. Nick Short, who is the interim director of NCDOT's Aviation Division, emphasized the importance of this program, citing past hurricanes like Florence, Matthew, and of course Helene, which affected western North Carolina. Those previous two storms caused severe flooding and infrastructure damage in the eastern half of the state, particularly in the Lumberton and Robeson County areas. Nearly half of Lumberton was flooded during Hurricane Florence, underscoring the need for reliable, quick response solutions to areas that are cut off. The grant will fund environmental research, community engagement, and other studies necessary for the program's implementation. The technology will enhance disaster preparedness by allowing drones to collect data and deliver aid remotely, reducing risk to emergency responders as well that, of course, try to get out there as soon as those storms subside. The initiative builds on NCDOT's previous successes with drone aircrafts in disaster scenarios where thousands of images were captured in areas that were then inaccessible by roads after the fact. The program was supported previously at its initial by a SMART program, which was part of a $500 million infrastructure package from the federal government that came out in 2021. Drone technology, regardless of what you think of it, is continuing to see massive uses both in the public and private sectors. And North Carolina, again, one of 23 states, totaling $130 million that is being doled out from the Department of Transportation. North Carolina receiving $1.1 million of that. We'll keep an eye on it and pass any details along right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour, where it's now 5:07, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. It is a big business in both the federal sector, the private sector. What if I told you that $1 billion was spent on DEI initiatives through the Department of Education at the federal level? Well, that would be 100% accurate. To get some more details on that this morning, it's my pleasure to welcome Katie Zender back to the Carolina Journal News Hour this morning. Katie, unless you've got a typo in your headline, you're reporting $1 billion worth of DEI spending. Is this a spell check error or is this accurate?
Nope, that's correct, Nick. Unfortunately, the U.S. Department of Education has spent over $1 billion in taxpayer dollars funding diversity, equity, and inclusion programs across 42 states and Washington, D.C.
Let's dive a little bit into this, and it's also got a North Carolina connection because one of the individuals sounding the alarm on this is Congresswoman Virginia Foxx. Tell us a little bit about some activities that have gone on over the last couple of weeks involving her.
Right, exactly, Nick. So there's a couple North Carolina ties here. The first one being Virginia Foxx. She blasted the Department of Education in a quote where she said, DEI is the woke addiction that the Biden-Harris administration simply cannot quit. And then she goes on to talk about the report. If you want to read more of her quote, readers can look at that in the report. But the other North Carolina tie here is that $21.5 million of that $1 billion actually went into funding DEI programs right here in Montgomery County in North Carolina.
And Montgomery County is a little bit east of the Charlotte area. It's right along Interstate 75. Go over those figures again. How many millions of dollars was spent in just that one county alone, Katie?
Right. So $21.5 million in taxpayer dollars. This is actually all out from a new report that was out last week from Parents Defending Education, where they break down the $1 billion in taxpayer dollars. They break it down into three different categories. And so there's three categories: DEI hiring, which is over $400 million, DEI programming, which is over $300 million, and then DEI-based mental health/social emotional learning, also known as SEL, which is over $150 million. So those are the three categories of funding that this $1 billion is broken into. But yes, so $21.5 million is right here in Montgomery County in North Carolina, funding DEI programs known as Teacher and Principal Effectiveness Acceleration in Montgomery. That's the acronym TEAM. The program also includes a teacher affinity group, or a TAG group. So what these things are is, according to the program, and I've linked the program for Montgomery County Schools in the article if readers want to look at that more, but it says, as part of our diversity and inclusion plan, we established district-wide TAG groups, or teacher affinity groups, for Black and Hispanic teachers who meet monthly to discuss mutual concerns and provide support for one another. In addition to that, Montgomery School's professional development plan includes monthly training from a university professor called, quote, Teaching in Colors. So over $21 million is going to fund these DEI programs here in Montgomery County in North Carolina.
You know, it's an interesting couple of things that you bring up there. First, you know, getting people together and getting groups together and going over things like accountability and things like that. Katie, inherently, there's no issue there. I think the big question is, how is getting teachers together, in this case, is the first part. The second, having somebody do a monthly training, how does that equate to $21 million over a 12-month calendar year? That seems like you would have to be almost burning the money as it's coming in to spend that kind of money to even get these groups together. It seems incredibly high.
Exactly, Nick. This is an exorbitant amount of money for just these two programs here. So yes, quite a bit of taxpayer dollars is being poured into that.
Is there any, I guess the question would be, and they're obviously in the district side, they're trying to figure out some sort of accountability. That's in the name of one of their programs. Do we have any accountability on this money? Was it effective? Did this $21.5 million lead to better test scores, better, lower dropout rates, higher graduation rates, anything like that? Or is unfortunately a lot of this just unaccounted for?
Right. So I actually talked to Brian Balfour at John Locke. He's the vice president of research here. And he said, given the fact that half of North Carolina students can't read or perform math at grade level, this news should cause outrage. It's absurd that tax dollars would go to funding these politically charged programs when public schools are failing at their most basic responsibility. This report provides yet more evidence that government schooling has been converted into political training exercises rather than an educational one.
And with that, of course, we're talking about the Department of Education, and we are now learning over the last couple of weeks that the former head of the Small Business Administration in Linda McMahon is going to be making her way into leading the Department of Education. That group is probably going to be under an incredible amount of scrutiny over the next couple of years. Trump's spoken pretty publicly about even dismantling the Department of Education at the federal level and bringing all that money back to the states.
Right, Nick. So back in 2023, under Agenda 27, President-elect Trump promised to close the Department of Education and return all education-related work to the state level. He said, quote, "We spend more money per pupil by 3 times than any other nation, and yet we're worse, and we're absolutely at the bottom," said Trump. "We're one of the worst, so you can't do worse. We're going to end education out of Washington, D.C. We're going to close it up and all those buildings all over the place, and yet people that in many cases hate our children, we're going to send it all back to the states." So that's his plan, is to send it back to the state level. We'll see if he follows through on that. Additionally, Nick, something that I've included in the article is there's a screenshot of all the entities that are receiving funding in North Carolina for DEI programming. So this includes Duke University, UNC Chapel Hill, several branches of UNC, several prominent universities here in North Carolina, as well as the Department of Public Instruction and several other, nonprofits and entities here in North Carolina. So that's included in the report as well, if readers want to take a look at that.
And they absolutely can take a look at that. Great insight this morning from Katie Zender. You can read more on her story by visiting our website, carolinajournal.com. Where it's now 5:14, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. It's time for a look at traffic on a Wednesday morning with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thanks so much, Nick. Good morning on this. 99.3 WBT.
It's now 5:20. You're listening to a Wednesday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour on News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Good morning to you. Well, North Carolina's Electoral College met yesterday at the state capitol to cast their votes for President-elect Donald Trump and Vice President-elect J.D. Vance. North Carolina wasn't the only state to do that. Electors across the country were meeting in their respective state capitals on Tuesday to cast their votes, finalizing all of the necessary formalities before Congress certifies the election next year. And then, of course, coming up at January 20th, about a month or so from now, when Inauguration Day takes place. Trump and Vance won the election with 312 of the nation's 538 electoral votes, defeating presidential nominee and Vice President Kamala Harris and her VP pick in Tim Walz, who received 226 electoral votes. As you're well aware, U.S. voters don't directly elect the president. Instead, when voters cast their ballot, those votes goes towards selecting electors in their respective states who are pledged to their preferred candidate. To win, a candidate must secure and receive 270 electoral votes. North Carolina, like many other states, uses a winner-take-all system and has 16 electoral votes. That breaks down to 14 U.S. representatives in the House and 2 U.S. senators. In the state, Trump received 2.89 million votes, with Harris receiving 2.71 million. Since Trump and Vance won the state completely, all 16 of those electoral votes went towards them, and that was the process that took place in our state capitol yesterday. It was confirmed and verified by the Secretary of State's office. Again, just some of these formalities as we approach the new year and get everything squared away for Trump's official inauguration coming up on January the 20th. That's one of the stories that we are tracking this morning. Where it's now 5:22, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. North Carolina this morning is canceling a $22.4 million grant for a group known as Infosys. This is after the tech firm failed to meet hiring goals. North Carolina's economic development officials confirmed earlier this week the cancellation of the $22.5 million job creation grant, or JDIG grant, for this company known as Infosys. This is after the company failed to create hundreds of jobs that were promised in Wake County, where remote working trends were the culprit, according to Infosys. They asked the state earlier this month to cancel the deal, saying that they were unable to meet hiring targets that were stipulated in the grant. Department of Commerce officials revealed the request on Tuesday during a regular meeting of the department's Economic Investment Committee, which agreed to cancel the grants. Important to note, no payments had been made to the company. North Carolina regularly offers financial incentives to companies that pledge to build and hire across the state in all 100 counties. As part of those deals, commerce officials and company executives agree on annual investments and hiring benchmarks. The state then doles out portions of the grant as the company gets closer to and eventually meets its target. Infosys, which employed more than 1,000 people in the state when the grant was approved all the way back in 2017, had pledged at the time to create 2,000 additional jobs at its Raleigh Innovation Hub. That would have brought it to nearly 3,000 jobs total, an expansion that was projected to grow the state's economy by almost $3 billion. But by the end of 2023, it had only created a quarter of those jobs at 562 new jobs, according to documents provided by the state. According to the executive vice president of Infosys in a December the 6th letter to state officials, they said, quote, "We have seen a significant shift with new hires not physically moving to North Carolina as, quote, work from home, end quote, became more widespread, especially for the technology sector. Accordingly, although we have increased the number of employees assigned to North Carolina-based projects, not all of those residents reside in the state, or those employees, I should say, reside in the state. Though mobility impact caused by the COVID-19 pandemic and changes in working patterns have adversely impacted Infosys's ability to meet that criteria. The company currently employs about 1,800 North Carolinians, according to the letter, adding that the company remains committed to the state, even though it will not be able to meet its hiring target. The company did meet its 2023 investment target of at least $7.9 million. It also met its 2023 job retention targets of 1,162 existing jobs. Infosys executives also say that they've ramped up efforts to partner with the state university and community college systems. They say, quote, Infosys will continue to invest in both hiring workers and our presence in the state as our businesses allow. We look forward to continuing to work with the state of North Carolina, which remains a strategically vital region for our business as natural home for a technology innovation. With this, state incentives are often tied to construction or occupancy within offices or factories to strengthen the local property tax base and to ensure the state benefits from employees who are physically in the state. But COVID-19 pandemic did accelerate and change how and where many companies do business. The state allows companies to count remote workers towards hiring targets, although those employees do have to live in North Carolina. So let's say you were working for Infosys in the Raleigh area, but as long as you were a resident of the state, even if you didn't go into the office, it would have counted towards that goal. However, if you're out of state, it does not. Several other companies have cited remote working trends and a reevaluation of real estate as a reason for backing out of incentive deals. With this, a recent company as well, known as Cognite Technology Solutions, sought to cancel their incentive package, which included up to $2 million in grant money, in part because of workers' trends that left fewer people working in the company's Charlotte office. Another company known as Cisneros Health also told state officials that they are continuing to evaluate their remote work landscape, and that caused its reevaluation and its ability to meet some of its incentive targets for a project in Morrisville, leading to the company to request the termination of its $8.5 million incentive agreement as well with the state after receiving payments totaling over $874,000. We talk a lot about JDIG and other grants here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. We will keep a close eye on them and let you know of any new companies that are receiving these grants, and of course those that unfortunately have to have them canceled due to not meeting their targets. Again, Infosys is the top story this morning for that. $22.5 million grant that is being canceled. It was approved back in 2017. It's now 5:28, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. It's time for another look at traffic this morning with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick.
It's 5:35. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour, streaming live on our Carolina Journal YouTube channel this morning. You can also take the show with you on demand by checking out our new podcast. It's available wherever you get your shows. Just search for the Carolina Journal News Hour, tap that subscribe or follow button, and take the show with you on demand. It's the Carolina Journal News Hour podcast. Download and subscribe now. In some statewide news this morning, Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson is seeking to move his defamation lawsuit against CNN and former porn store clerk Louis Money back to the state of North Carolina. Move that back to state court. Originally filed in state court, CNN transferred the case to federal court, arguing procedural grounds and seeking dismissal of Robinson's claims. Robinson's lawsuit alleges that Louis Money, fabricated and publicized false accusations in a music video and subsequent interviews, while CNN defamed him in an article accusing him of making lewd, racist posts under the pseudonym Mini Soldier on a pornographic website back in the early 2000s. Robinson contends that both parties acted with actual malice to harm his reputation. That was during his gubernatorial campaign, where he would go on to lose by over 800,000 votes. CNN claims Robinson's lawsuit lacks evidence of malice and that he improperly joined the Louis Money lawsuit to prevent federal jurisdictions. Money's legal team argued for dismissal, accusing Robinson of violating court rules by initially seeking $50 million in damages and creating a media spectacle. Both CNN and Money deny any sort of collaboration and argue that Robinson's allegations fail to meet legal standards for defamation. Robinson's lawyers assert the claims are valid, citing deliberate fabrications by both the Louis Money and CNN, as well as their failure to verify their reporting. That's on CNN's behalf. The lawsuit has garnered significant media attention, with Robinson framing it as a politically motivated attack, irregardless of whether Robinson's accusations here of it being politically motivated or not. There's very much evidence proving that it did have an effect on the gubernatorial race, in which Robinson lost by 15 points, over 800,000 votes statewide, to current Democrat Attorney General and Governor-elect Josh Stein. This will likely continue to go on for the next couple of months. We'll continue to track the details right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour, where it's now 5:38, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. As we head into the new year, there's going to be a lot of changes going on in the state of North Carolina. One of those will be that the current Attorney General and Josh Stein will be making his way to the governor's mansion. He'll be the next Democrat governor here in the state of North Carolina. And with that, we're hearing about some new cabinet picks that will be working alongside him and his administration. To get some additional details on that this morning, it's my pleasure to welcome Teresa Opeka from CarolinaJournal.com back to the News Hour this morning. Teresa, good morning to you. We've got a couple of folks that are hanging around from the Roy Cooper administration, also a Democrat. Where do we start there?
Sure. Thanks so much, Nick. Good morning to you, too. We've got Kristen Walker. She's been chosen to continue in her role as the state budget director. She's been that oversees the Office of State Budget and Management. She's held that position since 2022, and pretty important role there in the Cooper administration, now transitioning over to the Stein administration. We also have Joey Hopkins. He has been selected to stick around as Secretary of North Carolina Department of Transportation, and he took over that role in 2023 when longtime Secretary Eric Boyette retired. Also, one more we've got, and not without controversy, Eddie Buffalo Jr. He has been selected by Stein to continue his role as Department of Public Safety's Secretary. And he's held that position since 2021, which, when I say controversial, it's because that department had an audit by State Auditor Jessica Holmes that they failed to design or implement procedures about Hurricane Florence disaster recovery funds in accordance to how the legislature set up legislation, and also seeing how they measured it. Like people keep track of payroll, things of that nature. So that's come under fire. Of course, DPS oversees NCOR. I mean, have you heard about NCOR lately? Yeah, we've had Laura Hogshead, who was a former director of NCOR, either left or was fired late last month because, how many years now we've had all these hearings, government ops have had hearings about where all the funding is going for NCOR for funding Hurricanes Florence and Matthew victims, and the houses are not being built. And all of a sudden, well, they're millions of dollars in the hole. So yeah, overall, Eddie Buffalo oversees all of that. So it'll be interesting to see, and should mention ahead of time, all these appointments have to be confirmed by the state Senate. Especially this one will be interesting to see if he gets confirmed in that role.
I think most folks, and it would be a fair assumption to say Department of Public Safety, you probably think law enforcement as kind of the main thing if you're thinking of public safety. But we can't excuse and not talk about this audit that Teresa, we talked about a couple of weeks ago. NCOR, which we've been talking about for literally years now, and some of their failures. And of course, heading forward, what do we do with all of the relief and all of the money that's going to need to be spent out in Western North Carolina due to Hurricane Helene? So there's going to be a lot that the Department of Public Safety is going to have to look at. And I'll also bring up and note that the new state auditor is set to be Dave Bullock, who is a Republican and has made some things about like NCOR, the North Carolina Department of Transportation, the Board of Elections, major parts of his campaign. You're going to imagine there's going to be an even bigger spotlight on some of these entities in the coming weeks and months.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, talking to Mr. Bullock recently, he said he's looking forward to getting going on all these procedures. There's also now the Board of Elections. He's going to be overseeing the appointments for that too. So that's another, a new added addition to the auditor's office. So it will be a definitely interesting year coming up in 2025 for state politics here in North Carolina.
And you mentioned it earlier, and I just want to highlight it again. Like what we talk about in Washington, D.C., all the talk is, can Trump's cabinet picks be confirmed by the U.S. Senate? That same process here will take place in North Carolina. Teresa, is this something that you suspect could come up during some of these confirmations? I would presume for the most part that these are just kind of generally given an approval, especially when you've got a governor and a General Assembly that are in opposite political parties. It's probably more of like a rubber stamp like most things. However, maybe you're starting to see some controversy with some of these picks, specifically at DPS.
Yeah, and like in the past, for the most part, they have given the confirmation for all of those nominations. However, as you just mentioned, we've got Mr. Buffalo and DPS, who might be the first one maybe to face some more scrutiny as they go along in the confirmation process. It'll be time will tell, I guess you want to say, but yeah, it should be an interesting January in Raleigh to see what happens.
Of course, we'll be tracking that as we wrap it up here this morning. There's also a Charlotte connection in one of these cabinet picks as well. What do we have going on there?
Sure. So we have Gabriel Esparza of Charlotte. He was chosen to lead the Department of Administration. And his name should be a little bit familiar. Earlier this year, he ran and lost in the Democratic primary for state treasurer. He lost to Wesley Harris, the 3-term Democrat member of the North Carolina House. And then Harris would go on to lose to Republican Brad Briner, who is going to be the next state treasurer. So yeah, Charlotte connection. And like I said, Gabriel Esparza. He also has experience as a former entrepreneur and American Express executive, and he also served in the Biden administration as associate administrator of the U.S. Small Business Administration, SBA, which now we're also talking about the SBA for getting some loans to those out in Western North Carolina for Hurricane Helene relief. So yeah, a little bit of a Charlotte connection there as well.
There's a lot of moving pieces on this, a lot of names that we didn't have a chance to get into this morning. You can read more and all of those names at Teresa's story. You can visit that by checking out our website, carolinajournal.com. Where it's now 5:45, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Time for another look at traffic on this Wednesday morning with the great Boomer Von Cannon.
Well, thank you, Nick. Thank you.
WBT.
News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT, the Carolina Journal News Hour on a Wednesday edition, 5:53. A good morning to you. Well, yesterday, North Carolina's Electoral College and their members met at the state capitol to cast their votes for President-elect Donald Trump and Vice President-elect J.D. Vance. North Carolina wasn't the only state to do that yesterday, as electors from across the country were meeting in their respective state capitals to cast their votes, finalizing all of the necessary formalities before the congressional certification next year, and then, of course, the January the 20th inauguration for President-elect Donald Trump. Trump and Vance won the election with 312 of the nation's 538 electoral votes, defeating presidential nominee and current Vice President Kamala Harris and Vice President, her VP pick, in Tim Walz, who only received 226 of those votes. U.S. voters, as you're well aware, don't directly elect presidents. Instead, when voters cast their ballots, those votes go towards selecting electors in the state in which they live, who are pledged to their preferred candidate. To win, a candidate must secure 270 votes. North Carolina, like many other states, uses a winner-take-all system and has 16 electoral votes because of 2 U.S. senators and 14 representatives in the House. Trump received 2.89 million votes in the state, with Harris and Walz receiving 2.71 million, and since the state was won by Trump and Vance, all 16 of those electoral votes were pledged yesterday, as it took place at the old hall of the House of Representatives in the state capitol building in downtown Raleigh. The ceremony was convened by the North Carolina Secretary of State in Elaine Marshall, and the Secretary's office is responsible for arranging the meeting, including everything that took place there. That is done, as it was in many other states yesterday. And again, North Carolina, a winner-take-all state, getting those 16 electoral votes officially for the Trump-Vance ticket. Taking a look at some other statewide news this morning, North Carolina is among 23 states that is getting more than $130 million worth of grants from the U.S. Department of Transportation to promote innovative transportation technologies. The NCDOT's Division of Aviation is receiving $1.1 million to develop a drone-in-the-box program, utilizing autonomous drones to aid in disaster response and recovery. These drones can be deployed remotely before storms to capture damage images and deliver emergency supplies. Nick Short, who is the interim director of NCDOT's Aviation Division, emphasized the importance of the program, citing past hurricanes like Florence and Matthew, which caused severe flooding and infrastructure damage, particularly in areas in Lumberton and Robeson County in eastern North Carolina. With that, nearly half of Lumberton was flooded during Hurricane Florence, underscoring the need for reliable, quick response solutions. We saw similar scenes out in western North Carolina. The grant will fund environmental research, community engagement, and other studies necessary for the program's implementation. The technology will enhance disaster preparedness by allowing drones to collect data and deliver aid remotely, reducing the risk to first responders, those that are right there on the scene. The initiative builds on NCDOT's previous success with drones and drone aircrafts in disaster scenarios where thousands of images were captured in areas inaccessible by roads. That initial program was supported by SMART, S-M-A-R-T, back in 2021, where they received $500 million from the federal government. That's going to do it for a Wednesday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. WBT News is next, followed by Good Morning BT. We're back tomorrow morning, 5 to 6, right here on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT.